Good morning. We're going to talk about getting you started on week 9. First thing I need to talk about is you will have your character sketch due on October 14th. That's a pushed back date. So the new date is October 14th, which is coming up. I asked you to do the character sketch in 3 versions. So one version would be a phrase, just a phrase that would be embedded into a sentence. The second version would be an entire sentence devoted to a character sketch. Third would be a paragraph. You might want to start with the paragraph and then start working it down to the shorter versions. The reason I wanted to do 3 versions of this is that sometimes, well, let me first say, why should we do a character sketch? We're doing nonfiction. These are real people. We know these real people. We're not creating these people out of whole cloth. But at the same time, our reader does not know these people. So we have to provide a kind of introduction to these people so that for the reader, the people will be more than just a name. Okay, so that we'll have some little hook, some little bit of identity. It certainly is not a full description of what this person is like, but some little bit of identity so that we'll know more about this person than just the person's name. And so think of it as a way to introduce the people you're writing about to your readers. That's what a character sketch does. And by the way, character sketches are embedded in any kind of nonfiction writing. At the same time, sometimes an essay will be nothing but a character sketch, or an entire memoir might be nothing but a character sketch. The original sort of structure of a memoir was that it would be focusing on someone, usually a famous person, that you knew. And so you were writing about Abraham Lincoln or Socrates. First memoir that I'm aware of in Western civilization is Xenophon's memoir of Socrates. So that goes back to 5th century BCE. It's really only late 60s, early 70s, but really more so around 1990, that memoirs started to do more than just write about some famous person or some interesting person. So character sketches are important. Just as a way of getting started on giving you a little hint of what this is like. Now, I've talked about it a little bit, and I also posted a little bit about how to do this on the general discussion board. Somebody, I think maybe it was Suzanne, asked about it. So I was answering that question. I'm going to just read to you a few sentences from Joe Mackel's Last Street Before Cleveland, which is a memoir that he wrote. He's trying to find out about a friend of his who was a drug addict and died of an overdose and was just found in a car in a parking lot in Cleveland where Joe grew up. But the interesting sort of parallel story going on is Joe Mackel himself is an addict and was going through a relapse at the time that he was writing about. So there's this dual story of him trying to find out about his friend who died, but also trying to deal with his own relapse and get back to sobriety. At one point, Joe is walking through a cemetery where a number of his family members are buried. And he just runs through a series of character sketches. So let me just read a few of these, and it'll give you some sense of what a character sketch is like. There's Uncle Joe, who fought in World War II and mailed a letter written by a dead German soldier to a fallen man's home. There's my cousin Jimmy, who loved cars more than anything on earth, other than girls who love boys who loved cars more than anything on earth. There's my Uncle Don, murdered one Friday the 13th. And there are others who own a place of me as I do of them, all hanging out in a cemetery that extends for acres on the edge of the strip joints and porn shops that taper themselves blade sharp on the edge of Cleveland. So there are some character sketches. What is Joe doing in those character sketches? Well, he's writing about some key event that happened to that person or what that person was passionate about. Sometimes what you're doing with a character sketch is what does that person's physical appearance look like? How does that person walk or move or talk? What is the person's speech patterns like? Or is there some little definitive characteristic of that person that's going to provide what I've been calling the hook? And that's what you got to try and look for is what is the hook? What is one or a handful of key features about that person? They're going to help to identify that person and give the reader a sense that the reader knows that person. So that's what we're looking for. That's due October 14th. I would start with the paragraph, shorten the paragraph down to a sentence, shorten the sentence down to a phrase of 4 or 5 words that would be embedded within a larger sentence. Okay, because you're working on that, I'm going to set up the reading assignment a little different this week. So what we're going to do is there are 3 essays posted in the folder for this week, week 9. And I'm only going to ask that you read one of those. You can pick whichever one you want to read and make a post about that particular reading assignment. So let me just briefly talk about the 3 reading assignments, and then you can decide which one you're going to go read and do a post on. There's a Scott Russell Sanders essay called Staying Put. We're doing character sketches. Well, here's one of the other things that you should be thinking about whenever you're doing nonfiction writing. Sometimes the place in which the events you're writing about are taking place are awfully important. In some ways, the place can be a character itself within a piece of nonfiction. I think you'll see this from reading Sanders' essay. So as you do a character sketch of people in your stories, sometimes what you need to do is a character sketch of the place and talk about the character of the place. And Sanders' essay will give you a sense of how to do that. A lot of people, there's also a chapter by Ernest Hemingway from his Death in the Afternoon, which is his nonfiction piece about bullfighting. The reason I included this is that a lot of people talk about creative nonfiction as something that starts to happen in the 1980s when Lee Gutkin coins the phrase. Other people talk about it as new journalism came on the scene. Things like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood in the late, and the new journalism was on the scene or prominent in American culture, late 1960s, early 1970s. Ernest Hemingway's Death in the Afternoon, I don't know the exact date of that. I should have looked it up beforehand, but this is something he wrote, I think, in the 1940s or so. So I would argue it's a piece of creative nonfiction. In fact, Lee Gutkin has spoken about it before as a piece of creative nonfiction. There's this interesting thing, even though it's nonfiction and he's basically writing about very technical aspects of bullfighting throughout the book, he invents this character, this old woman character that he has kind of a dialogue with. So that's a kind of an interesting feature that you might want to look at. The final essay that you can choose from is by Vershawn Young. Vershawn Young last spring was on our campus, so you may have heard him speak then. He's a linguist, an academic. He writes a lot about African American dialects and things like code switching, code meshing, and how all of that has an impact on the teaching of writing. So you might be interested in just reading Vershawn Young in general. But the essay I posted is called Going Home. Here's what I was thinking of in terms of just exposing you to that particular essay is this is an academic writing about public issues in a public forum. So there is a role for academics to assume within the public forum as being public intellectuals. And I think that's what Vershawn Young is doing in this essay. So that's something that I thought you should also think about as an option for doing essays. Sometimes you can be writing about very technical academic kind of issues, and it might be something that would be published in, say, New York Magazine or New York Review of Books or New York Times as a feature column or Atlantic Monthly, New Yorker, whatever. So those are your options. If you have questions about the character sketches, please send me an email, and I'll set up also a discussion board for you to post drafts of character sketches if you want to get some feedback from other people in the class. And remember that you are in a group. I did establish some groups for you to share drafts with also. So feel free to send drafts to the people in your group and ask them to provide some feedback. That should go to them as an email. Have a good week, and I'll see you next week.